got incredible knowledge of this area, which is great for me. It's always wonderful to spend time in an area like this with somebody with local knowledge. They know the habits of the certain animals, especially the lions and leopards, who are our kind of most difficult animals to track down. So even just chatting briefly with Mark last night, he gave me some insights into where Karula has given birth in the past and what he thinks her movements will be over the next few weeks. So great to have him back on the team with some local knowledge, and I look forward to gleaning as much information as I can from him over the coming months. I've got word that he is not far away, and then the plan is, because he hasn't seen many of you for a long time, and a lot of you viewers do know Mark, like I've said before. For those of you who are new, he's been working for Wild Earth for years, so he's built up a big group of friends that follow him closely, and he's built a relationship up with them. So the plan is for him to come and take over from here and just spend some time catching up with you guys, sharing some stories for what he's been up to in the last few months. And of course, the more questions that you guys put through to Mark and myself at any stage of the day, the game drives or the safaris going forward, not only in the rain, but the more questions you ask us, the more we can share with you, and the more information we can give you, and the more of an idea we can get of what you're interested in and what you want to see. So be sure to ask questions. On Twitter it would be #SafariLive, and on email it's questions@wildearth.tv. So get those questions coming through, please. We'd really appreciate that, and I'm sure Mark would look forward to answering all the questions from you guys. And here he comes. Oh, Diane, good morning. Welcome to the slightly wet Sabi Sands, Djuma and Arathusa in South Africa. Diane has asked if we've seen the injured baby impala. Now, I'm glad you've asked that question, Diane, because interestingly enough, the herd of impala within which that injured lamb was with was usually seen in these open clearings around us, in what is called the quarantine clearings. It was an old quarantine area many years ago when livestock and even general game were being reintroduced back into this reserve. So they used to spend time, and then all of a sudden one morning we came back and they were gone. Yesterday, however, I did see what I thought to be the same herd that was here on Impala Road. I was on a quest to find leopard, and the clock was ticking, so I didn't get to spend much time with them, but I did keep an eye out as I drove past to see if I could see the lamb with an injured leg, and I didn't. However, now that I know where it is, or at least where I think they are, the herd, we will be able to go back there and have a closer look. So my plan is to head there to look for Karula. That is where her tracks have been, and where there have been rumors of her being seen moving through that area. So I will head into that area in all likelihood this morning, and due to less time pressure, I will be able to have a closer look for you and hopefully give you an update on the injured impala. But thanks, Diane. We have been concerned. I can't remember when last we did see that animal, but I think it was about 5 days ago, potentially even a bit more, maybe 4 or 5 days ago. So it would be great to know if it's still doing well and if it's potentially healing in any way. Sadly, I personally don't think it will recover from that injury, but who knows, I could well be proved wrong, and animals do often have a very resilient way of recovering from injuries that would typically put us in the hospital. So it will be interesting to see how it's doing. Another question's just come through about another injured animal from Christine. Good morning, Christine. Thanks for the question. Christine is interested in the injured hippo. Now that has got us all a bit boggled, because it seems to have disappeared off the radar. Now, we've been in communication with the guides in the other camps. There's been no sign of him. He could well be in a small pond, like I said a little bit earlier. Because of the rain we're getting at the moment, there are a lot of little, what would usually be dry ponds in the winter are now filling up. So maybe it's seeking refuge in a smaller, unknown little pond or wallow in the center of a block. On the other hand, it may have passed away, but I'd be less inclined to think that, because an animal of that size would create a huge amount of hyena activity, general predators, lions, leopards, vultures. There's a lot of meat on a hippo. So if it had have passed away, I'm sure we would have got some signals as to where it did pass away, and we hopefully would have found it. Having said that, this is a massive area. There are huge blocks where there are no roads going through them, so like I said, it could have potentially died in a block, or it could just be recovering in a little wallow in an area that we do not really have easy access to. So thanks, Christine. Another good question, but sadly there's been no intel on that animal since I think HT saw it last on Arathusa, and like I said, since then there's been no sign. Now, I'm not entirely sure if I'm going to swap vehicles with Mark. I think I will be, and then Mark will simply just slot in here. It's just minutes away for those of you who are looking forward to meeting him. Okay, so the plan is, and bear with us folks, we are going to swap vehicles entirely. So there will be a little bit of confusion, but it'll be nice to see, for you guys to see a little bit of the behind the scenes. I wouldn't say chaos in this example, but a bit of the behind the scenes action that we have to deal with in situations like this. So what I'm gonna suggest is, I think Brian might have to. Okay. I know we've actually, I've just seen Jason jump out of a vehicle that was covered. I didn't even know he was here, so that's good news. We've got an extra hand to help this little event that is going to unfold for you guys. Jason was seeking refuge under one of the tarpaulins on the vehicle, and he just popped out, which was quite funny and a relief. Excuse me. Now, like I said, Christine's just, I'm not sure if it's the same Christine, but if it is, thanks for the second question, and if it's another Christine, welcome. Welcome, it's another Christine. And she's been inquiring as to the success of the two lioness last night, whether they had a successful evening. As far as I know, when we all closed down yesterday evening, we had no updates from the other guides that stayed with those animals as they moved off on their evening hunts. But I'm sure this morning it won't take long for us to get an update on those animals. But sadly, as far as we know, they did not have any joy yesterday evening. But there's a lot of hours between kind of 8 o'clock, when most game drive vehicles will close down, till 6 o'clock this morning, gives the lions a lot of opportunities and a lot of time to make kills. And it is fair to say that it is easier at night for the predators. The rain would have helped. You could imagine a predator stalking up on potential prey. If there's rain pitter-pattering all around, it will muffle the predator's approach. So maybe the rain aided in their hunting last night, but nothing's for sure. It would be interesting to know, though, also for those two lioness, I believe they've from a pride with more lioness within it. So the fact that there were just two of them, and also that one lioness seemed to be a little bit less experienced at hunting, may lean towards the fact that they weren't going to be successful. They'd probably be more au fait with hunting in a bigger group, what they're used to. But so much depends on luck out here, folks. There's a certain amount of skill that the predators obviously have, a great amount of skill that the predators have in catching their prey, but there's also an element of luck, and that goes the same for us in terms of finding animals. So the good news, folks, is that Mark is up and ready, and we are going to switch over to him, and there'll be a little bit of vehicle shuffling, but it'll just take a few minutes, and then Mark will be ready to catch up with all of the older viewers. And we've just had a small technical glitch with Mark, so it'll be a few more minutes. But like I said, get those questions coming through that you would like to ask Mark. So get those questions coming through to Mark, and I'm sure he's got a lot of catching up to do with you guys. Okay, so there's been another little slight change of plans. Mark, good morning.
How are you, Sky?
Welcome.
Thank you.
Very good.
Great to meet you too.
You too, man.
Looks
you
like
too.
we're going to have fun for it. Hello everybody, welcome, and great to be back. It's really fantastic. I'm shaking. It's so amazing.
Folks, I'm going to leave you with Mark.
Really?
Well, I don't have to, actually. I can stay here for a while. Let's stay here for a while.
We can discuss one or two things, I think, get a question. I got to remember how these things work. Well, hi everybody. It's quite amazing because it's almost 6 years to the day that I stood in front of this camera for the first time on a tryout, and it's quite an amazing road that I've driven myself in this little vehicle, and it's really fantastic to be back. So I'm pleased to be here. Great crew that we have. It's nice to see Brian again. It's great to see Peter again. Haven't had much time to catch up, but I'm hoping during the day today we can. It's amazing that he's got a little family compared to when I last spoke to him, and that's certainly a big change in his life. So I'm going to see if we're going to get some questions. Lovely day. Guinea fowl are going again.
Yes, they are. I'm not sure about these guinea fowl. They've got me excited quite a few times. I come running out of the control hearing the guinea fowl alarm calling, and often it's one on one side of a fence and
yeah,
the other one trying to communicate.
And it's just more communication.
Yeah. Okay, folks, I'm going to leave you with Mark. Mark, good luck. I'm sure you've got a lot of catching up to do with some of your old viewers, and we'll keep in touch.
We will.
See you later, folks.
Jan on Twitter. Hi Jan, what have I been up to? Well, no good really. What have I been up to? Gosh, I don't know where to begin. It's been sorry, I got arriving in the rain, my glasses are a little bit otherwise. Where do I start? Well, we left after leaving here 3 years ago. I mean, a lot of you saw me last year in Thornybush, and that was great. So I suppose since Thornybush, I've been doing a lot of freelance work, not really that much guiding, but when I can, and mostly up in a little game reserve called Salati Game Reserve, which is between Palabora and Hoedspruit. Palabora is a big mining town up north of Hoedspruit. It's got one of the biggest open cast pits, which is actually quite a sad thing. The way the mine itself, the dump, seems to just expand over the bushveld. It's got one of the biggest magnetite reserves. Magnetite is a new mineral on the market used in computers and microchips and things. And before they go, I want my water out of that vehicle, amongst other things, because I need hydration even in the wet weather. Lovely wet morning. It's amazing because I haven't had very much rain at home, and thank you very much. Haven't had very much rain at home. Up in the Timbavati, especially up in the northern part of the Timbavati where I live, It's a much drier area. It has a lot less rainfall than down here in Djuma. In fact, what's quite incredible is to see the greenery and all these herbs and forbs coming out here on the ground level. Whereas up there we don't have very much at all in the way of green on the ground. The trees tend to come back into leaf a lot earlier. They were all even blooming back in August, September. They just need the sun moving back into the southern hemisphere and the warmth, the increase in daily temperature for them to then use their reserves that they have in their roots, the nutrients and the moisture that they keep in their roots. They bring that up to the crown and they, I suppose, get ready for the rain. So their crowns always open up a lot quicker. For the ground cover, though, they need soaking rain, and we haven't had much of that at all. We've had good, very heavy downpours, which causes a lot of runoff. It doesn't sink very deep into the soil, so it doesn't really feed the roots and tubers and bulbs of the flowers and things that one would normally see at this time of the year. But having said that, I did find a flower, and I'm going to be putting it on one of the social sites. I don't know, I've still got to catch up with all the social media. It's something that I'm not familiar with. The Twitter, I'm still trying to get my head around Twitter. I don't really know what Twitter is. I'm a twit, not knowing what Twitter is. But we had a week of overcast and a little bit of drizzle that didn't really do well for the grasses, but it shot up an orchid that I've never seen before. I mean, I've been in that area my entire life, and the only orchids I've ever known to exist are the 2 tree orchids that we get. So that's going to be a flower that I'll be putting up for the ladies, of course. And of course I can't wait to see what we're going to find when all of this starts maturing. It's going to be quite incredible to see what flowers we find this year. What else I've been doing? I've been working on my house, my bungalow, my rondavel. A rondavel is a round thatched hut. It's where I live. It's a very big round structure, but it's very old. And back in the 80s I had an elephant push a tree over on the one side of the house, and in the early 90s elephant pushed a water tank at the back of the house. And so that has caused a little bit of damage, and I suppose to top it all, I put a little bit too much thatch on it when I rethatched about 15 years ago, and that has, the weight of the roof is pushing down on the walls, it's pushing the walls out. So I've been quite busy trying to secure that, because I don't think it would survive another wet season, and I'm hoping that it'll stay standing while I'm here over the next 2 months. And of course, being a naturalist, that's what I've been doing. I spend my days in the bush. I have elephants around home, so I've been getting to know them a lot better. Quite amazing seeing some of the elephants that I used to see here, up there. So I haven't really been doing much. I'm in a little bit of a, what could I call it? A slump when it comes to things. I'm a bit reluctant to guide at the lodges. I'm not too happy with the way some of the lodges are guiding these days. It's all rushing around to the big 5, and there's no real place for a slow drive looking at all the little things that I usually do. So Jan, I hope that answers your question and adds in a few more details. Looking at the sky, we seem to be having one of those days where the weather is coming in waves. It's got patches of dark and patches of light, and you can see some of the dark patches moving in. It's going to be getting quite wet again pretty soon, and so we're going to hopefully be a bit lucky with this break in the rain that we've got now. I don't think it's going to be good enough to go out, because it is coming in waves. There is a low, what we call a low ceiling, low cloud, and it is moving fairly fast. So with these little open patches, they'll be gone quickly. Yeah. Diane, hello Diane. Welcome to our drive this morning, our non-drive. It's quite amazing, because we used to do this back in FC. We used to sit in front of the computer, and I think this is far more fun, far greater fun to just stand out here and actually talk to you under this shelter. Diane wants to know what I'm most looking forward to coming back. Well, how much time have we got? I would say pretty much everything. I mean, back at Djuma, it's been 3 years since I've been here, so it's going to be wonderful to catch up on things that I got so accustomed to when I was here at Djuma. Not necessarily the animals, well, of course, Karula. I mean, one can't discount her presence in Djuma and the fact that she is so important to everything that we do. We've been following her for so long and all of her cubs. So I'm looking forward very much to reacquainting myself with her and the lion. But I think it's more, it's also, there are trees that I want to see again. There are plants I want to see again. There are some of the pans and water holes I want to see how they've changed. I'm looking forward to seeing whether there are new plants that I didn't see the last time I was here, when I spent a couple of years here. It's not impossible. Some of these things that we're going to see flowering now that might even come up after this rain, one might not have seen them for a dozen years or so, or even more. Sometimes some of the lilies, some of the bulbous plants need just the right succession of rainfall, sunshine, overcast conditions. And when that sequence is right, they throw up a flower. Sometimes they'll only throw up their leaves for the summer months, and they don't have the opportunity to bloom. So that's one of the things I'm looking forward to. The daily gem, I think. Mary's asking if I started my book yet. We'll get back to that, Mary. My book. I've got pages and pages and pages of things I've written. They're never going to be, I don't think they'll ever be able to be put into a book. But one day, who knows, when I grow up, maybe I'll put things together in a book. But getting back to Diane, I think just the fact that I'm back here and that Jigger's here, and well, we've got some of the old guys, nice to see Alex again. I'm just looking forward to the whole concept of being able to broadcast live, to be able to take you all out on a safari and show you my little piece of Africa, or rather show you Africa through my eyes. And I know that we've all got our own way of looking at things, and I hope that I can complement the excellent stuff that Scott's only just started, but especially Peter and Hayden, who sort of continue on with what they've been presenting so far. And I know somebody wrote on my wall that I got pretty big shoes to fill, and I do, if I wore shoes. But Mary, the book. I write a lot. I write, when I see things, I write about them. When I see really amazing things in nature. There's a francolin that's competing with me. Sometimes things that really strike me, and without a camera to film them or without any other way to record them, I put my thoughts down on paper. I sometimes read some of the stuff I wrote, and sometimes it's not really publishable, but it can always be edited and it can always be fixed. But it's all very disjointed, and it requires some sort of cohesion. It requires something to put it all together and make a story, make it interesting, and make it. And I don't know how that will ever come about, but one day. I'm a little bit of a, I suppose, a little bit of a procrastinator, but I'm also a little bit of a, I start things greatly, and I sort of peter out halfway through, and I seldom get back to things that I start, because sometimes I get a little bit bored with what I start, and something comes along that attracts my attention. As you might see on the drives, I'll be driving, talking about one thing, and suddenly an ant or a wasp or a flower or an elephant will distract me. So I'm easily distracted, very easily distracted. Looks like it's getting a bit darker again. Hello, Anne. Anne in Rhode Island. Well, Anne's got a question about my hat. She says she sees I have a new hat and a new band, and the story behind it. And this is an old hat, actually. It's an old hat that might look new because it's wet. It's very wet. This is, I think I wore this hat last year. In fact, it's a little bit more worn than it was last year. My new hat is, actually, it's in the other vehicle, and I hope it's not going to get damaged. That's for dry drives. At the moment it's a bit too wet for my new hat, so I'm keeping this one on. The band I've worn before, the bandana that's on it, it's actually a bald eagle, and it was always dedicated to the Hancock eagles and the bald eagles that we have on the Wild Earth site, but it was given to me by an old girlfriend. Well, no, she's not so old. Sorry, Dee, you're not old, but a girlfriend from a long time ago, when we were in our 20s. And it was just before I came down to Djuma for the first time about 6 years ago. We reunited after about, I don't know, 25 odd years or so, maybe more. We hadn't seen each other since we'd been dating back in the early 80s. And she gave me this bandana and said if I get the job on Wild Earth that I must wear it. And I thought today would be a pretty good day to wear this bandana because it's kind of starting again. It's restarting, but it's starting anew. And well, you'll still see my other hat soon when it's dry, not in the rain. They don't last too long when they get too wet, so I try to keep them as long as possible. The other hats that I have, they're still at home. I thought I didn't need to bring all of them, but you'll see maybe a different one on Fireside Chat and a different one on dry weather and this one on wet weather. I put my different hats on. Carolyn in Chicago is, I'm trying to think, is that Carolyn I know? Am I wearing shoes? I'm getting bitten. Carolyn Johnson. Hi Carolyn. Wanting to know if I'm wearing shoes. Is that a rhetorical question? Watch here. I can't balance. It's a new type of shoe. They're transparent and they sort of have the appearance of a foot. So yes, those are my shoes. I should be wearing shoes, I suppose, but it's we don't have. They're not as prolific as some of these plants that seed so well, but still a bad alien to have. On the rivers we have things like lantana, which I think you have pretty much all over the world. Another plant that was moved around the world because it had a pretty flower, and of course it escaped and it became wild and has invaded areas. Lantana in this country covers a lot of riverine areas, and it actually forces out a lot of the indigenous flora. And being a noxious weed, I call it an obnoxious weed, it's something that one shouldn't encourage, and it's very hard to eradicate. In fact, most of these aliens are hard to eradicate. You have to attack them before they seed, and it's labor intensive because you don't want to be damaging, especially because the animals are depending on it for their food. I'm waiting for Karula. She's supposed to meet me here today. Mauricia, there's a new name for me. I haven't met you before, and welcome to our drives. Mauricia is sending a message through on Twitter. Heard that I love elephants. Well, yes, I do. I think I am an elephant spirit, or I was, or I'm going to be an elephant. Or there's something in my life that has still got to do with elephants, something that I still have to do with elephants. Very similar to the feeling one gets when you're with a whale in the ocean. And of course a lot easier because elephants are far more numerous in this part of the world. But there is an incredible sense of tranquility, peace, and I'm trying to find the words. In the presence of elephants, we as humans, no matter what we've done to we are humbled, because I suppose our brain tells us that a big creature like an elephant is very, very strong and is very powerful and it can damage us. We all have this fear of elephants, which is natural because it's such a big animal. But what we don't realize is that elephants don't realize how big they are, and they have just as much respect and fear for us. And when you get an elephant that accepts you into its space, when you have a moment with an elephant, similar to how Peter was experiencing that elephant yesterday, and how we have experienced elephants from the Jigab in the past, the trust that goes both ways between you and an elephant is an incredible and very humbling thing to experience, because they do have that ability or the capacity for aggression and being very, very strong. They can do unknown damage. Trust me, I know about that one. But it's when you can sit in their presence and they not necessarily ignore you, because they will either accept you or they won't. And if they accept you, they will appear to ignore you. But generally, they'll even come and feed close to you, just to try and get that little bit closer, to try and understand a little bit more about us as much as we're trying to understand them. And I think more so than any other animal on land, lion are pretty much indifferent. And of course, the cats are fantastic. And I am a cat person. I love cats dearly. I've spent a lot of time with the big cats in Africa over the last few decades. And I'm amazed at their strength and their agility and just their felinity. The cats are amazing, even domestic cats. When you look at a domestic cat, for those of you who are cat lovers, you know what I'm talking about. The domestic cat has the qualities of all of the big cats, all rolled into one little ball of fur. And when you get close to a domestic cat, there are little bits of lion and little bits of leopard and little bits of cheetah in it. And yet an elephant, there's something about an elephant. Maybe that's just all I need to say. There's something about elephants. And maybe over the next couple of months we're going to experience a few moments with hopefully not only bulls, but hopefully there'll be the odd breeding herd around. Funny enough, I've seen it twice now, coming in and out of Djuma. Last night going back and coming in now this morning, passing elephants on the road out in Manyeleti. So I'm sure they'll be making their way this way at some point, because there are a lot of elephants, so we will be lucky. I'm sure we're going to be able to meet up with some of them at some point. I don't know. Only thing I can say is from there we'll see the elephants, and you'll pick up from me what it is about them over time. Yes, Will. What have you got? Hi, Cindy, on email. Thanks for the email, Cindy. And Cindy wants to know if I'm new to the Arathusa area to guiding in the, and yes, I am. I've only ever done one game drive at Arathusa. I did that with a couple of our viewers. They were staying at Arathusa, and I went to meet them, and I went out for a drive with them, and I was very lucky because I saw one of Karula's cubs, actually a cub that I named, the little boy Shivambalana. Here comes the rain. And so sitting in the back of a Land Rover, it's not very easy to get any idea of the area, although there were a few places that I recognized because it was on the other side of Gowrie Main. But you're going to see that I think the exploration of Arathusa is probably another thing that I'm looking forward to. Diane asked that earlier, and I think that's something that I forgot to mention, is that there's an entirely new area. This is about the same size as Djuma, that I've never seen before. I've been in many different parts of the Sabi Sand, down in the south, in the middle, up in the northwest. I've seen quite a lot of the Sabi Sand, and the years that I spent up here in the north at Djuma, the only place I ever got to see really was Djuma. I never really got to see any other parts of this area of the Sabi Sand. So that's going to be very special. It's always nice to see a slightly new area. Even driving through from Manyeleti, I spent a long time doing walking safaris back in the 90s, the mid-90s. I was doing walking safaris in Manyeleti, but I never ventured to the southern area of Manyeleti, south of what we call main camp, which is the area that we drive through to get here. So that's also, just seeing that is very new. So I'm sure I'm going to have a few mistakes of getting lost and having to look at a map and getting used to the names of the roads and the area there as well. But that's something to look forward to. Not so much the getting lost part, but that's fun. Often when one takes a wrong turn, you often find things that you never thought you would see. Amazing how that happens sometimes. Cindy in Arizona. Hi Cindy. Which animal am I most excited to see again? Everything. Everyone. All of them. I want to see the sticks. I want to see what's happened with the kahumas. I want to see what's happening with the lion. I want to see if Ntwandamela is here, because he hasn't been up in the Timbavati for a while. I got some lovely big bulls up there, but Ntwandamela is a magnificent old bull that has spent a lot of time down here. I don't know how I could even find one particular animal that I could think of that I want, that would be the top of the list. Karula's way up there, trust me. And of course, any of her kids. There's an entire generation that I don't even know. Cubs from 2 years ago, I think it was. Must be those cubs. The ones that must have been born 3 years ago. I reckon about 3 years ago. The ones that were probably born when we were leaving here. The ones... No, sorry. That was Shivambalana and Shivinzi. So it was maybe the 2 year ago cubs. I don't know, I'm losing track. I've got to catch up with everything. I've got to catch up with what's happened with the lion and how many are still around and who is still around. I don't have access to the internet and to the media that everybody lives with on a daily basis, getting details from all the guides and keeping an update of all the lions and things. I do have a great friend in Austria, Sharon, who has at times sent me updates via email about what's going on. But it's a different thing when one is involved in an area, getting an update of all the animals and having that information sink in and retaining that information, as opposed to coming back here now and, well, there's more incentive to retain it. I remember reading things and thinking, oh, well, I'm not likely to be going down to Djuma again anytime soon. So I read stuff and I would read an update on the sticks or what's happened, and something else would come along and it would slip my mind what I'd read. So I'm looking forward to, gosh, every aspect of being here at Djuma, every aspect of being in that seat, driving this car around, looking for all of those things. Beverly and Blue Jay, wanting to know the fate of Teddy the hyena. Haven't the faintest. I mean, when we left here in 2011, Teddy was still a little cub, and I don't think there was any information given out on any of the sites after that. Of course, what happened then also was that Djuma closed down as a commercial lodge. It retained its status as a self-catering lodge and much smaller crew. I don't know how many vehicles still drive around on Djuma, and I don't know how many of them would have been interested in following the life of that little hyena, and whether they would have mentioned it in blogs or posts. So no, from the very last day that we did a drive with Seb and Tara, that was the last I ever heard of Teddy. And if we see a young hyena now that looks to be about 3 years old, there's no telling whether it's little Teddy or not. We can only guess, maybe. I'm looking forward to going back to the den. I'm looking forward to seeing what's happening with the clan. But we didn't really make any spot patterns, and we didn't really make any positive IDs with any of the individual hyena that were at the den, which is maybe something we can look at. Just trying to find key features, maybe looking back at archives or even going back to old photographs and seeing if we can recognize any of them from maybe notches in the ear or scratches on the nose or some other feature that sets them apart from the rest of the clan. So that would be nice to see. It would be nice to try and follow up on. Getting wet now. Hey RC, nice to hear from you again. I'm looking forward to some birding. This is RC in the Netherlands. Great birder up in that part of the world, and always interested in the birds that we see, especially because we've got migrants that have come out. Most of the migrants are here. I saw my first European or Eurasian roller just leaving home yesterday, so I reckon most of them are here. One day there were no kingfishers and the next day they were everywhere. It's funny how they came in. They came in a little bit late this year. I'm not too sure whether any rangers or any of the guys from other lodges posted there the dates of the first kingfishers, but for me up in Timbavati it was late, end of November, as opposed to sort of first week in November. And the same with the impala lambing. The impalas were lambing very late this year. But when I think of it, the late rains that we're having now are very similar to 6 years ago. And the last 6 years we've had fairly decent early rains. So maybe the late rains has made things, sort of the domino effect, made things late further on. But I have to get out there. I have to go for a drive and see what things look like, because I'm itching after not being here for so long. It's really a wonderful thing to try and get there and get out. But of course it's raining. Go ahead, Brian. Be nice to see. Ruth, hello Ruth. Nice to hear from you, and very nice that you're with us again. Ruth in Florida wants to know how different this area is to Salati. It's vast, it's quite different. Salati, also a much drier area. The Salati has a river called the Salati River, and the last few years of really good rainfall have kept water in it. It's dry now, of course. It has its puddles. I suppose the most stark or most noticeable feature that makes it so different to this area of the Sabi Sand, I'm not saying the entire Sabi Sand, because there are areas that are similar, but what makes it very different are the koppies. Koppies are rocky outcrops. Sometimes they're maybe 50 meters high, maybe sometimes 100 meters high, sometimes a little bit higher, just short of little mountains, but huge big granite boulders that are pushed up, and almost like some of them have been balanced by giants. And the flora that occurs on these koppies, as well as there's specific animals that have inhabited the niches that you find on these rocky outcrops. The hyrax, for one, which is a very small mammal that, strangely enough, is related to elephant in some way. And then, of course, there's the small klipspringer, which is an antelope that is adapted to that rocky environment and found itself a niche that no other antelope can invade, as it were, short of a few million years of evolution, of course. And they have very, very unique habitats that they live in on those rocky outcrops. And then, of course, all the reptiles that come with it, and amazing lizards up there that you don't see down here. And it's not really that far as the crow flies. If you look at a map of the Kruger Park area, you'll see the town of Palabora, sort of most of the way up on the western boundary of Kruger in the north. And then if you come south from there, you get the town of Hoedspruit, and halfway in between there's a little town called Mica, M-I-C-A, which is where they mine mica, used in insulation and paints and things. From Mica there's a triangle that goes to Gravelot, a town called Gravelot, and that triangle is filled with the area known as Salati. Salati is very much a similar concept to the Sabi Sand. It's a bunch of landowners who got together to create a conservancy, dropped their internal fencing. They maintain a perimeter fence. It's a fairly large reserve. It's about, I'd say, maybe half the size of the Sabi Sand, or 2/3 the size of the Sabi Sand. So it's quite big. They do a lot of animal breeding there. And antelope, that they breed antelope that have high values in auctions, game auctions, in the game breeders of South Africa. Our deputy president, in fact, of the country is also a game breeder. And there's big money in it these days. When you get an impala selling for something like 18 million rand, it's quite an important impala. And of course there are a lot of other animals, other antelope, other animals that are bred and sold for auction. And stock, I guess. Of course, now that you have genetics and they're able to match male and female according to their genetics, their genes, they can produce really magnificent animals, and of course they fetch high prices. So Salati pretty much runs without lodges at all. There are no commercial lodges on Salati. I work for a company that owns most of it. a company that was started by the founder of Salati, who had the original property on Salati. A very big company in this country. They used to do a lot of fruit juices and citrus, a company called Halls. And they have tended more towards the finance. They do a lot of avos. I mean, Halls are still very, very high up in the avo industry. And they bring their corporate clients, or the board comes down, or the directors, and I host them, and I take them around. So it's not commercial guiding in any way, that it is at the commercial lodges. It's a lot different, because the pressure isn't there to see so much as just to be. And then there is the issue that because it's not a commercial reserve and you don't have a network of vehicles driving around, the only vehicles that drive around are some of the private landowners who have their own lodges. Of course, there are anti-poaching patrols, which are very active. And there is an eco-training school there. They train guides. It's called eco-training. So they have guides courses, and they have permission to be there to do their guide training. The other vehicles that drive around are the researchers. Being a self-contained reserve, and it is also in an area where it is surrounded on all three sides by main roads that carry very, very heavy traffic. It's a kind of reserve that can never really be incorporated into Kruger, mainly due to the kind of traffic, especially the main Palabora-Nelspruit road, which is exceptionally busy with trucks carrying the ore. We don't have a very good rail network in this country. Well, we do have a good rail network. The maintenance of our trains has fallen by the wayside. So for some reason, these big diesel ore carriers ply the road between Palabora and Nelspruit more than, even though there's a railway line. And so you can't have animals needing to cross that kind of a road. So Salati is self-contained. And I suppose from that point of view, research is vital, especially because of the population of elephant and lion that they have. It's vital to know how these populations actually manage to survive within an island ecosystem, because it might as well be an island being fenced in. And managing the population to ensure that they don't become overpopulated, but more importantly, perhaps, that there's no interbreeding. And that is something, I suppose, that's happening at Thornybush. Thornybush is a third of the size of Salati, and with the lion and elephant that they have there, it's even more micromanaged as a population than that needs to in an area, say, the size of Salati. It's very similar to what used to happen here in the Sabi Sand. Sabi Sand, before the 90s, was self-contained, and the management was far more intense than what is needed now in terms of maintaining animal numbers within a fenced-in area. One of the greatest things about the Sabi Sands was in the early 90s, they opened up the reserve to the Kruger National Park, and now there's freedom of movement for the animals. Of course, there isn't freedom of movement for us humans, but that freedom of movement that allows animals to interact with a greater population requires less maintenance, or rather less management of the population, because they're open to the greater Kruger area, which is several million acres worth. That water reminds me. Excuse me. Okay. Susan in Scottsdale. Is that? No, Scottsdale sounds like Arizona to me. Hello, Susan. I'm going to sort of have to come out. I haven't said it yet, but it's going to have to come out now, rather than later. It depends. It depends on so many things, because the density of the population of leopard, and of course the density of the population of leopard's enemies like lion and hyena, can dictate the breeding cycle of things. But I guess if also the lifespan, that's the other thing. So what exactly is the lifespan of a leopard? Well, let's say on average 15 years. And if they can give birth to a set of cubs every 2 years, call it 7, maybe 8 litters, who knows? It'd be interesting to find out. I'm sure by now things have been recorded here in the Sabi Sand, some of the leopards that they've watched over the last couple of decades. And 20 years ago when I was here in the Sabi Sand, we were studying leopards, so I'm sure that by now there is some record of the number of litters individual leopards have had. It would be interesting to actually find out a variety of answers from different areas of the Sabi Sand, how many litters each or different leopard have had, to try and get some idea. I've never really correlated all of that information, so I would maybe guess anywhere between 5 and maybe 8 litters in a lifetime. Pepperbird, hello Linda, great to have you with us again. And Pepperbird wants to know if Karula would recognize my individual scent and show herself to me. I think I'd have to mark my territory first, Linda, and then I reckon she would. She came through camp often enough that there was certainly some of my scent around camp. Whether she recognizes it or not, I don't know. I don't think she would have. I don't think. I mean, she might recognize something that she smelt before and disregard it as something she doesn't. But in terms of recognizing me for who I am, no. And especially sitting in the vehicle, it's not likely that she's going to pick up much of a scent when we're on drive. Possible, if I'm talking, it's possible that she might pick up on my voice. I know that elephants do, but they're different. They listen more than leopards do. Cats can be so... what's the word I'm looking for? Cats just ignore us often, or they pretend to at least. So I can't really say. I'd really like to see her and see, but I have to be honest. I really don't think she'll react very much. I think she'll just do the way she does with the vehicles. If anything, it's the vehicle she's likely to recognize. She's likely to recognize the jigger over Zanele, or the other vehicle. Because it has its own inimitable sound that is unique to each vehicle. Other than that, I don't think so. You know, also the smells of the fuel, the oil, all the smells that come with the vehicle are far stronger than my individual scent. I suppose I could try not showering for a couple of days and see if that makes my scent any stronger, makes any difference. But I'm sure that whoever I'm sharing with is not going to be too happy with that. And I'm sure if I walked into FC after a couple of days, the machines would shut down. But interesting question though. You know, how do we know? How would we know if she did recognize it? It's not that she shows any affection for us, not that she shows any acknowledgement of our individual presence. If anything, it's just a collective. We're just people in a vehicle, and we're in her life from time to time. Would be interesting. I don't know. I must ask Peter if he recognized anything in terms of recognition. If he found anything, if there was any recognition. I don't know. Has Peter seen Karula? He must have by now. So I'm sure that I'm sure that he might have some idea. I really don't think so. It'd be nice, you know. It'd be a wonderful fantasy to believe that she'll come running up to the vehicle and smack it with a tail or something, but that's dreaming. I don't think that's going to happen. Looks like it's getting nice and light again, but there's still another wave of rain coming. Mary in Kansas, KC Mary, Kansas City. I remember that name. Hi Mary, nice to have you with us. And Mary wants to know if I still enjoy bonsai as a hobby, and what else was there? But yes, I do. I mean, bonsai is something that one never stops. I'm obsessed with trees. Of course, I lost my entire bonsai collection because I'd left it in the Cape, and God knows what, gosh knows what's happened to them. But I have started. I collected a lot of seedlings a couple of years ago. I don't know how they're going to do it home. The problem with being in the bush is that when I'm away from home, and I'm working, whether it's a few days or a couple of weeks or even a couple of months, it's hard to take care of them. Well, they need taking care of, and sometimes they dry out and die. But I'll never get a collection like I had before. At the moment, they're still all young trees. None of them are that old. They were seedlings from over the last 3 years that I've collected. Actually, there were some that I had here when we were filming here at Djuma. And it's just, I guess, a bit of an obsession that when the seed starts growing, I put it in a pot, and mostly knobthorns. I've got one mahogany, and I've got what we call a cassia, not acacia, but cassia, C-A-S-S-I-A. The cassias are the Senecio family. I'm trying to think what they are. They've got pods. They also sort of the legume family. Beautiful yellow flowers on the shambok pod. And then, of course, Mary was asking if I enjoy vegetable gardening. I do, but I can't. You can't grow vegetables in a place where I live. It's hard enough trying to grow aloes. I love aloes. I love the euphorbia family, and the euphorbias are pretty much one of the only things that elephants don't touch because they have a poisonous sap. But I love all the different aloes, especially because they flower in the dry season when it's very, very dry, and you get the splash of yellow, orange and red when they flower, but they also bring in the sunbirds, and it's just a pleasure having the color of the aloe flowers. But unfortunately, elephants use aloes medicinally, and just recently, in fact this last week, most of my aloes were pulled up. I woke up in the middle of the night, an elephant on my stoep eating my aloes out of one of the little flower beds. So I suppose I grow aloes for elephants, and they're entitled to them. And I'm sure while I'm gone, quite possible that an elephant will help himself to my little knobthorn baobabs. Don't know, baobab and knobthorns. We'll see. Elephants tend to tease me that way. Being reminded that Twitter is something I'm still getting used to. I know it's been around a long time, but I haven't been really that active on the internet and things. But hashtag Safari Live is our Twitter, what you call it, account? Handle. Is that what you call it? Is a handle. That's what we used to have on CB radios, was a handle. Back in the 70s. You remember those days? Hashtag Safari Live is our Twitter handle, and for questions, it's questions@wildearth.tv. Please send in questions. Well, of course, I love questions. The more questions, the more I get talking. The more I get talking, the more I start remembering about things. And of course, what it also does is questions find the areas of nature that I don't know about. That I then go to my books. I didn't bring my books today, but they will be in the jigger with me for the next couple of months. And I very, very seldom like a question unanswered, especially a question I don't know. I'd like to get to my books immediately to find out answers. Nature is such a vast and wonderful world. We all live in it. We're all part of it. A lot of us, even in the cities, we might not be exposed to the outdoors so much, but you still have nature even on your balcony, and there's always something, whether it's an insect or a spider or a flower or a tree. But when it comes to learning about nature, it's one of those. The thing about learning about nature is many things in life is that the more you learn, the less you know, because the more you learn about things, the greater the scope of what it is that you're learning about. So it becomes, your percentage of knowledge becomes less and less and less. It's all very well if you know they're plants and they're trees, they're those two things, or rather plants and animals rather, and that's it. Animals are divided up into birds and fish, And then when you start breaking that down and finding the interactions between all the living organisms on this planet and how everything is so interconnected and so interdependent on each other, it becomes so convoluted that it becomes mind-boggling. And of course, one can never know even just a fraction. You're only ever scratching the surface, no matter how much one learns, and no matter how much one reads, no matter how much one sees. It's only ever scratching the surface. And of course you could live in an area like this, just on this open area alone, your entire life, and every day you're going to find something new. And that, I think, is brings me back to an earlier question, is what am I most looking forward to? And that is another aspect of it, is finding something new, finding something I've never seen before, finding something I don't know about, or getting a question from a viewer that requires me to go to my books and find out an answer. So, really exciting stuff. And what tree would that be, Brian? Kruger girl, Beth. Hello, Beth. I'm just looking at an animal walking across the open area here. A very determined stride. Scott's coming to join me. My favorite tree. What is my favorite tree? Gosh, the favorite questions are very difficult, because when you love everything, having a favorite, and I'll mention a favorite, and then suddenly I'll remember another favorite, and then that'll remind me that there might even be another favorite. Baobabs, undoubtedly. Baobabs go with elephants like peanut butter goes with jelly. Not that I eat peanut butter with jelly, but I know that they go like Oreos and milk. Baobabs go with elephants, and of course, being a lover of elephants, I'm in awe of baobabs. Behind us is a jackalberry. Jackalberries are amazing. They're like these old men that grow on riverbanks, and when you find jackalberries that are 800 to 1,000 years old, these magnificent big trees. Then there's the nyalaberry. Fantastic trees. I've only ever seen them up in Salati, but I'm sure they grow elsewhere in the Kruger. But I've never seen them here in the Sabi Sand, and we don't get them in the Timbavati. The tree I mentioned earlier called the cassia, the shambok pod, Cassia breviata. When they start flowering, they're the most beautiful little trees. They're a small tree. They don't really get very big, but they have a little lollipop crown and the most beautiful yellow flowers. In fact, I think the cover of one of the main tree books for Southern African trees are the flowers of the cassia. And they're these little yellow lollipops that stick out of the dry bushveld. They're one of the first things that come into bloom. So the more I think about the different trees and the times that they're blooming or leafing or fruiting, there again, the marula tree, they're coming into fruit now. The fruit, some of the green fruits are falling already, but in January when the yellow fruits are falling, it's fantastic. Pick up a handful of vitamin C, they're sweet, they're delicious. Very difficult. The favorite question, that's always a difficult one. So I'm going to hand over to Scott, and he's going to come and chat to you for a while, and I'll see you in a little while. Bye, everyone. Welcome back.
Thanks, Mark. Thanks very much. Good to hear some of your tales from the control room there.
Good. I'm going to head down there. I need to get a warmer jacket.
Okay, cool. We'll catch up with you later, Mark. Okay, good morning, John from Missouri. John has just asked how long have I been a guide for, and I started my guiding career officially in 2008. Within the Sabi Sands, I was privileged, I feel, to have started my career at a camp that actually facilitated its own training course. Now, you find most camps rely on external training facilities to train up guides initially, and then guides then apply at various lodges and get the experience in the field thereafter, whereas it was quite unique for me to get my training done at the camp where I ended up working. And it was a 6-month training course, which isn't a long time, but with a good mentor, which we certainly had. Every day we would go out on a morning game drive with him. There was just 6 of us on the course, get back from morning game drive, do about 3 or 4 hours of lectures, working through the various subjects, and then an afternoon game drive also with our trainer or mentor. So we did that for 6 months, over which period of time we covered all the bases, botany, ecology, flora, fauna, you name it. Also spent a lot of time focusing on getting the walking qualification, which is, I feel, one of the most important parts of the guiding training to get done properly. It is the most dangerous time to be in the bush when you are on foot. In the vehicle you've got a lot more safety. Animals can hear you coming from further. You're a bigger being, even though you the driver and your passengers may be small. Collectively you are a big being, which is therefore powerful in nature. The size does matter. So being on foot requires a lot of training, and in order to get the required knowledge, you do have to push the boundaries to a degree in getting close to animals, and also understanding how they respond to you on foot, and how to handle charges. So during that 6-month period we spent a lot of time on foot in the Sabi Sands, where we did a lot of the walking, as well as in the Kruger National Park on a private concession that the lodge I used to work for also had a camp. That was really beautiful, east of Satara Camp, almost basically directly east of us here, and slightly north on the Mozambican border. We had a beautiful concession that was very good for walking, huge blocks with no roads through them, so did a lot of walking there, and then even went up to Zimbabwe, where there's a reserve with a high black rhino population, where we spent a lot of time interacting with black rhino on foot. So started there in 2008, did the 6-month training course, and then continued to work there for 3 years. And then it was time for a change of scenery, and I was looking for new challenges and new wilderness areas. So fortunately, the boarding school that I went to in South Africa attracted a lot of Kenyan scholars. So a few of my friends from Kenya had started up various safari companies and or had their own camps up there, and they heard that I was looking for a change of scenery and called me up. So thankfully I was welcomed to Kenya with a lot of friends that looked after me there, and introduced me to the various peoples. It is a small industry, the guiding industry. It doesn't matter where you go in Africa. So everyone looked after me, and I got to experience some beautiful places within Kenya initially, and also in Tanzania. So my role in Kenya and Tanzania within the guiding industry or safari industry did change a little bit, in that I wasn't based at any one camp working daily. I was doing privately guided safaris where you literally meet the guests at the airports and you follow them around on their generally 2-week safaris, flying from camp to camp, which was incredible for me. It showcased Kenya's incredible wilderness areas, places that I'd only ever seen on TV. The Masai Mara, to mention, probably one that everyone knows the best, where the incredible wildebeest migration occurs. So I got to see a lot of Kenya and what it has to offer, which was great. I also, on top of the private guiding, did a little bit of guide training and work at various camps within Kenya and Tanzania, and also managing camps, which was great for me because I got to experience the other side of the industry. Guides tend to get it easy, I feel, having now experienced the role of a camp manager. So I diversified a little bit and got to spend time in some incredible places. One place in particular which comes to mind is in Tanzania. It's an area called the Mahali Mountains. Now, it's a national park within Tanzania, not very well known because it's so far off the beaten track. But in the Mahali Mountains National Park, the main reason you would go there is to view chimpanzees, which I had never seen before. So that in itself was a huge highlight for me, being able to view chimps for the first time. They're incredible animals. And on top of the animals in that area, the scenery is really breathtaking. You on the banks of Lake Tanganyika, which is the second deepest lake in the world. It's massive. You can see Congo from the other side where I was based about midway up the lake, just south of a small town called Kigoma. And it's a very interesting national park because there's no roads. The mountainous terrain would make it impossible to build a road network there. So your only way into the camp is by boats. There's an airstrip an hour boat ride away from the camp. And that was an incredible place that I would suggest Googling. It's Mahale, Mahale. And that is one of the favorite places that I've experienced in Africa so far. So I just thought I'd share it with you. It's worth having a look at. It's a freshwater lake, but the water is crystal clear. You can see about 20 meters visibility, and there's a huge diversity in endemic fish species that live within this lake. A lot of cichlids that are really colorful fish. So have a look at the Mahale Mountains National Park. If any of you are looking into doing a trip to Africa, I would try and incorporate that into the mix. But yeah, so since the beginning of 2008, I've been in the safari industry and I've been loving every moment of it. Now with Wild Earth, it's been a new chapter for me, and so far I'm really loving it, and it'll be interesting to see what happens next. But I do intend to stay in this industry as long as I can. Lisa on Twitter, good morning. Lisa's question is my most memorable encounter. Now, there are different genres, I feel, when it comes to questions like this. So the one that's come to mind now, and that's just by chance, is one of my more dangerous encounters, and that is also obviously a lot, it's very memorable, sorry. The closest I've ever come to feeling that I may have to use a rifle on a walk was with two guests, which was great because the more guests behind you on a walk, the more variables and more things that can go wrong. So thankfully there were only two guests and myself on a morning walk. We had completed the morning game drive, had a quick bite to eat, and then we were walking up along the Sand River, which is a beautiful river that flows through the Sabi Sands Reserve, further south of here, and lined with big ebony trees or jackalberry trees that Mark was just talking about. They are majestic trees, and I always wish you could kind of tap into the information that these jackalberries could share with you from what they've seen over the years. Anyway, we were walking along this riverbed, and we encountered an elephant bull. Now, the elephant was probably 40 meters away, which in most circumstances is a relatively safe distance. There's enough time for you to make the necessary judgments, test the wind, establish whether the animal is in must or if he's aggressive. So we saw him, and he had sensed us as soon as we had sensed him. Now, from my experience with walking, it's always better to retreat if an animal knows you are there, and then you can always come in closer once you've established the scenario. So as soon as I saw that he had seen us, and we had obviously just seen him, I told the guests to retreat just on the same path we had come in on, and everything was calm at this stage, but the elephant did start following us. Now, when an elephant walks quickly, now it wasn't running, it was just walking briskly, it will catch up to you as a human. Obviously, its stride's a lot bigger than ours, and it came to a point where I knew it was gaining on us, and I thought it would be beneficial to choose a place that we could use as our base, somewhere to bunker down, a place of relative safety, and it was below one of these big, beautiful jackalberry or ebony trees. And I got the guests behind one side of the trunk. It was kind of on a slight embankment down to the river, and I stood at the front of the tree, and the elephant proceeded to charge. On the elephant's first charge, I realized that it was an elephant that I'd seen before. Now, this elephant had somehow, and it's not abnormal for elephant to outwit us as humans, but around a lot of these camps in the area, there's what we call an elephant fence. Now, that's simply two strands of electric fence elevated above the ground, so all the other animals can pass through the camp, except for elephants, and then obviously giraffe also cannot pass through because of these two raised electrical wires. Because the electrical wires prevent elephants from getting in, you could imagine the oasis that occurs within inside these campgrounds, and the elephants know this. So what they can do is they can use their foot to push down one of the wooden poles and therefore get into the camp. They find ways to get in, and this bull did find a way in, and usually we kind of can usher them out with vehicles, and there's ways and means of getting them out of the camp, but it does cause you to be confrontational with these animals. Now, this animal had been in camp, like I say, for 4 or 5 days, and his tolerance of humans was becoming less and less, and he was beginning to understand that he was a lot more powerful than us. Obviously, a few people had run away from it, and it had realized that it has the upper hand over us. And when a few guides tried to chase the elephants out of camp, it actually managed to knock one of the guides over. Now, the guy had been scrambling up a rocky outcrop, and the elephant just hit him with its trunk, and he fell into a natural kind of cavity within all these boulders. And this is what saved his life, because the elephant then climbed on top of him and proceeded to try and squash him. But because he was in this natural cavity within the rocks, the elephant couldn't quite get to him, and then eventually moved off. He's okay, there were no issues, but it was 4 days later that I encountered him out in the field. We had got him out of camp after it had got a hold of the one guide. And because it had crossed that human-animal boundary and it knew that it was in charge, it felt the same way with myself and the 2 guests on the walk. So when it came in on the first charge, it stopped probably from me to the camera away, which means just out of trunk reach, probably 2.5 meters, and its trunk flung up and hit the branches above my head. And I'm glad I didn't shoot the animal. Obviously, that's the last thing you want to do. And then he retreated, and the whole time I was talking to my guests, reassuring them that everything was okay. Thankfully, they didn't realize the gravity of the whole occasion, and they thought it was kind of all part of the show, which was great because they didn't panic. If they'd have panicked and run, you can imagine if I'm looking at the elephants and the guest runs off behind me, I can't see that, and next thing you know, the elephant's chasing the guest, and then you've got trouble on your hands. So they were comfortably kind of stuck behind the tree, and I was in front talking to them and the elephant just to try and calm the animal down as much as you can and just let it know that you're not trying to hide. And by also talking calmly after it's charged, if it does charge again, you can increase your audio assault and shout and scream and clap, that way making it a little bit more apprehensive to continue with a full charge. This carried on. It would charge, retreat a few meters, play with the sand with its trunk, and then charge again. And it happened for about half an hour. Now, by this stage, half an hour of adrenaline pumping through your body, I was wired. My whole body was shaking, and I needed backup. So thankfully, with the handheld radio, I got a hold of the base camp, and they sent out 2 vehicles that came and chased the elephant off. But that certainly was one of my most memorable encounters on foot. It was the closest I've ever come to having to use a weapon, which is the last thing you want to do in your guiding career. So yeah, that comes to mind with the most memorable, dangerous encounter. Thanks for that question. Thankfully, that elephant wasn't seen again. Okay, we've got a very nice question that's come through from Deb on Twitter, asking whether the guides' roles are different to that of trackers. And the answer to that is yes. Your roles are fundamentally very different, but you do work together as a team, and at most camps, you don't swap trackers and chop and change with different groups of guests. You form a team, form a bond, and it's essential because you need to get to understand one another. You're working as a team on a daily basis under it's pressure, different to office pressure in the city, but you are under pressure to show guests a good time and find them animals. So the bond between a guide and a tracker is important, and understanding and knowing the different roles of one another's job is also critical. So let me break things down for you. Your role as a guide is to be doing a lot more talking to the guests while you're on drive. Obviously, the tracker's often perched up on the bonnet here, so for him to communicate with the guests is a little bit more difficult. He's a lot further away, and he needs to focus on tracks on the road. Now, it is not an easy thing being a tracker. It's an incredible art form, and it requires immense concentration. So they perched up here on the hood of the car, on the bonnets, scanning for tracks. When the tracker does spot tracks, he obviously stops me as the guide, puts his hand up, jumps off, and together we may try and decipher as to how fresh the tracks are. Obviously, they are the professionals, not necessarily the guides, and together you kind of work out a game plan. And more often than not, you then leave the tracker with a rifle and a radio, and he goes off and follows these tracks on foot. It's the best way to track animals on foot, even if the tracks are going down the road. Your senses are more heightened. You don't have any vehicle audio preventing you from hearing alarm calls and or warning calls from whatever you may be tracking. So you can leave the tracker for an hour or 2 hours sometimes, walking through the bush. He'll have a handheld radio with which he communicates to you, and that way he can say, okay, well, the tracks are heading towards this junction, and would you mind looping ahead, checking that junction to see if the tracks come out? And by doing that, if the tracks do come out on that junction, he can speed up through the block and continue from that last point of where the tracks are. You also find that the trackers will not necessarily sit in with meals with guests, which it's often a role that guides do. Depending on the lodge, you may join your guests for breakfast, lunch and dinner, or sometimes just dinners, depending on where you are, whereas the tracker may be out looking for more game while you're doing these things in the morning after breakfast. Having said that, they are very different. You find a lot of trackers do become guides. It's kind of a natural progression for some. Other trackers who could certainly be a guide choose not to be, because they prefer being in the bush alone, finding the animals, because there is an incredible thrill about tracking and finding animals. So they prefer that to being in the vehicle chatting to the guests the whole time. So depending on the individual tracker, some decide to stay trackers even though they could well be a guide. They simply need that rush of being out on foot and finding the animals. I'm trying to think of any other major differences, but not much comes to mind. If anything does come to mind, I'll be sure to add on and elaborate to that question. But in short, the roles are different, but I cannot stress how important the teamwork is. A funny story about, well, not a funny story, it's quite a scary scenario that I faced with the tracker, James Mdugga. Now, James Mdugga was an incredible tracker. He was mid-50s when we teamed up with him, and his knowledge and experience within the Sabi Sands and within the tracking field was incredible. It was a privilege for me to be teamed up with him. It was as I'd come out of the training course, and to be with such a wise man really helped me cut my teeth in the guiding community. And I remember one afternoon we were out, and he had found tracks of a young male leopard that we had watched grow up from birth, similar to how Karula's young have been monitored since they are first seen just a couple of weeks old most of the time. So we knew this young male leopard well, and we were following tracks of him. Well, he was James Mdugga, the tracker, was following tracks of him through an area where there was a network of sandy riverbeds, small, what we also term drainage lines. And I had dropped James off with his handheld radio and the rifle, a 4.58. It's a very big caliber rifle that can stop anything in its tracks, anything that you may come across here. So he was out on foot, and how it works when you drop the track off in most camps is that there's a less busy radio frequency that the trackers use so that they can communicate between one another, and also the guides can get a hold of them on, but not cause too much noise interference when they're out doing their thing. Whereas the main channel that all the people are broadcasting, the different sightings, and it's a lot more traffic, audio traffic, is for the guides predominantly, and there's a separate channel for the trackers. Now, James had switched over to channel 2, which is the tracker channel, and I was on channel 1, and I carried on with my drive, leaving James to do his thing. I got a about leaving him for 45 minutes to an hour, I got a call from him, and just like normal, he said, "Scott, come in, go ahead." He said, "Come to Shangwapan quickly." And that was no different to how he would usually respond if he has found an animal. Get here and get here quickly. So I did as I was told, and I raced off to Shangwapan, assuming that he had located this leopard that we were looking for. By the time I got to Shangwapan, it probably took me about 5 minutes. I saw the leopard lying down on one side of the small pan, which was no surprise. That is what I expected to see, because he had told me to get there quickly, and I was obviously very proud of him for finding it. And then I started looking for him. Now, often the tracker knows where you'd be coming from and tries to get himself into a position where he can jump back into the vehicle and join the sighting with you. But in this situation, he wasn't anywhere to be seen. So I scanned around, and eventually I saw him lying in the reeds, kind of, not the reeds, but tall grass at the edge of the pan. And I thought, you know, he was a bit of a joker, and I thought, was he trying to hide from the leopard and do something a bit different? It was nothing he had ever done before, though. So I drove over to investigate and pick him up, and then I realized that he had a look of terror on his face as I got closer. Now, what had happened was, while he was looking for tracks in this series, this network of different sandy riverbeds, he had come up to one of them, and it's probably a meter drop from the bank of the riverbed into the small riverbed, and the riverbed was only about 2 meters wide and very windy. Now, he had got to the edge of a path that led into the riverbed where he needed to check for tracks, and as he looked down, he saw a buffalo. Now, it was a lone buffalo bull lying in the riverbed about 10 meters away from him. And at the same moment that he saw it, this buffalo came up and started chasing him. Now, because the buffalo was in the riverbed, James decided to try and cover as much ground away from him as he could, away from the buffalo, and there was a tree that he knew he could get up. The problem was that as he turned to run, he dislocated and tore all the ligaments in his knee. He was obviously in a big rush, because when a buffalo is chasing you, you don't waste any time. And he thankfully managed to make it a few meters away from the riverbed. Therefore, when he fell and collapsed, because his knee no longer worked and you can't run on one leg, he collapsed in the long grass out of view of the buffalo. As the buffalo came out over the bank, James had disappeared in the long grass, thankfully, and the buffalo came running straight past him and missed him. So he was very fortunate. I'm sure he would have made it to the tree had his knee had not given way, but who knows what would have happened if he didn't twist his knee. As painful as the rehabilitation was, I think he was a lucky individual to get away with that one unscathed. Anyway, that was quite an interesting story between me and one of the trackers that I worked with, James Mdago. What a great man. He was rehabilitated completely, had 2 knee operations, and he's backtracking. He actually came back sooner than he was supposed to. He said he needed to get back into the bush, so we eased him in slowly, but he got back into the bush sooner than he was even supposed to. So just an interesting story about some of the tracking incidents that have happened with me and trackers in the past. That's it's just flickering in the distance. Sorry, Shanae, I don't know what it could be. It may be an elephant's ear. It is far away, but I can just see something moving in the distance. But your best bet would be to leave New Zealand as a starting point, come to South Africa, and obviously do some research before you get here as to which training course to get onto, and or if there are any lodges where you can train. And it's certainly not any more difficult for a girl than it would be for a guy to get into this industry, and that is important to know. When you think about it, there's nothing really macho or boy orientated that is required to be a guide. A lot of the time you driving around in a vehicle, looking for interesting things to talk about. So it's got nothing to do with strength or manliness or bravado. And I really enjoyed the fact that the camp where I started my career did have four ladies, because they do open your mind to certain things that boys and men may tend to overlook. So it was a great mix, and it's something that I know you are interested in doing. You've mentioned that before to me, so I think you need to come out, and I'm not sure when last you were out in Africa, but come back for a visit, and let's see what inroads we could have. And on Facebook after this, I'll send you a message as to the different training facilities that there are, and what I would suggest looking into. It's a dream that I think you should follow, because I know you are interested in it, so don't let anything stop you coming out here and doing it. You can always go back if you don't like it. Aha! Very nice question that's just come through from either Judy or Julie, asking whether I've ever had a snake fall into my vehicle when driving over or driving off-road under a tree. And the answer to that is no. But I can tell you an interesting story about a snake and a vehicle. It's not unheard of, though, to be driving off-road or under trees and snakes fall into vehicles. I don't know of any first-hand clear stories, but I can assure you it has happened, and it must be a very interesting spectacle to behold, because as soon as the snake comes in, and I'm sure even the driver may eject himself from the vehicle, so it would be something quite interesting to witness. But the story that I have about a snake and a vehicle is, I've actually got two. One was in the Kruger National Park at a camp where I used to work there, and what happened was there was a Mozambican spitting cobra. It's not uncommon for these snakes to be around infrastructure. They like the habitats that is created by human infrastructure. So you quite often have to catch them when they are in guests' rooms or in and around the camp and relocate them out into the bush. Now, this was one of my first relocations of a Mozambican spitting cobra, and actually probably the first time I caught one. So my adrenaline was pumping, and I was quite proud of myself for catching the snake successfully, and we had driven out a few kilometers away from the camp. And I'd taken my camera along because I figured when we released the snake we might get some photographic opportunities. So we probably walked 2 meters away from the vehicle. That was the problem. When you release a snake, go far away from the vehicle, because it's often the best and closest structure within which the snake wants to escape to. So I released the snake from the bucket that we had put it in, and the first thing it did was head straight up into the inner workings of the hood of the vehicle. Now, what that means is you can't drive the vehicle, because you don't want to put the snake through any stress. There's obviously a lot of moving parts, and then you don't want to kill the snake. So we were stuck with the snake in the engine of our vehicle. It's also a dangerous environment within which to be trying to re-catch or find out where it is, because there's a lot of hiding places. So we ended up just leaving the vehicle there for about an hour and a half. We sat under a tree not far away and just watched closely until eventually it did come slithering out, but it wasn't the ideal situation. So that was releasing a Mozambican spitting cobra that slithered back into the vehicle. And the second story, also with the Mozambican spitting cobra, which I find quite interesting, we had stopped for an evening sundowner. Now, for those of you who haven't been on safari and are only joining us on these live drives, when you are here in real life, it's commonplace to stop in the evening, watch the sun go down, have a beer or a gin and tonic, and just stretch your legs, spend some time off the vehicle. We had arrived for a sundowner stop, and I'd parked next to a small buffalo thorn. It was probably only 1.5 meters high and a little bulbous bush on the top. And it was very close to the driver's door of the vehicle, and I was usually on the front of the vehicles. There's a table that folds up that you use to pour all the drinks, and you base yourself, but obviously you need to bring all the cooler boxes and drinks from the back of the vehicle to the front. Now, I had been walking between the hood of the vehicle and the boot to collect the cooler boxes and everything. And on the second trip to the back of the car, I noticed some water, kind of some liquid, just touched me on the face. So I looked up thinking, did a bird just pee on me? And didn't see anything. And obviously it wasn't one of my smartest moments, because looking back I should have deduced what was going on faster. And then when I came back for a second time, I realized this liquid hitting me on the face, but I realized it wasn't coming from the top, it was coming from kind of eye level or below me. Luckily I was still wearing my sunglasses, and as I looked into the bush I realized that there was a Mozambican spinning cobra just nestled there spitting at me every time I came past. So that was an easy one to get out of, because we simply had to move the vehicle. But an interesting story regarding snakes and vehicles. Having said that, though, we were just chatting last night around the campfire about snakes and which snakes we've seen since we've been here. And what's important to know about coming out here is that even though there are lots of snakes, we very seldom see them, sadly. So the black mamba that I saw the other day with Jason filming, that for me was an incredible highlight, because you don't see many snakes out here. You see lots of sign of them, you know they're here, you see their tracks crossing the roads, but they've got their wits about them, and they'd prefer to avoid human confrontation, thankfully, from a safety perspective, not from a viewing perspective, of course. So they often hide away from you, and the chances of having a snake bite or a negative snake interaction out here are very slim. So don't let that deter you from coming out to Africa. You don't see snakes very often, and encounters with them are few and far between. Okay, now this is a good question from Christine on Twitter, asking whether, having spent lots of time out here over the years, do you become complacent, and do you kind of put your guard down when it comes to dangerous animals? The answer to a degree is yes. The reason I say that is, now that I'm back in the Sabi Sands, spending a lot of time on foot tracking, I am very alert and aware of the dangers, and I have thought back to when I left here 3.5 years ago, that I would potentially be a little bit more comfortable walking in the bush, but that's not to say that you'd become completely complacent. You know that it's your life that you're playing with out here. Things can go wrong extremely quickly, so you do need to have your wits about you. And I wouldn't say that it's necessarily complacency, but you do become familiar, and the more time you spend here, the more honed your skills become, and the more honed your skills become, the more in touch you are with things, and the less chance there's of something going wrong. So now that I've come back, and I haven't been here for a while, and I haven't spent too much time on foot over the last year, my skills may be a little bit rusty, and they need fine-tuning. So each day that comes on now, and my skills become better, your ability to see tracks and hear the right sounds improve, it obviously becomes a safer experience. But it doesn't matter who you are. When you walk around out here, you do have your wits about you. I know guides that have been doing walking trails for years, and if a small bird flies up from a bush, a francolin for example, they'll still get a bit of a fright, because anything can happen out here, and anyone who has worked in this industry knows that. So you do need to have your wits about you. The chances of things going wrong are very slim. You could take 100 people who have got no experience of the bush and put them here today, and in all likelihood 99 of them will come back this evening, if not 100, because animals will avoid human confrontation at all costs, unless their life is in danger or they feel their young are threatened. So having said that, you do have the odds in your favor, but you do need to be very, very careful. In this area, the Sabi Sands, since 2008, I've only heard of one guide actually coming into a very dangerous situation with an animal on a walk, and that was quite recently. A guide got attacked by a hippo and thankfully survived, but they are missing a small piece of their arm now, which is a relatively small price to pay considering what a hippo can do to you. But other than that, years will pass without any negative encounters or dangerous encounters that results in human injury or casualties. That must also be attributed to the high level of training within South Africa, the qualifications required and legislations that require you to be fully trained to be able to walk. But a combination of good training, also within the Sabi Sands, it's a very high-end product or high level of guiding in this area, and each lodge competing with its surrounding lodges will therefore increase the training and make sure their guides are really good, so that natural competition creates guides to be on really good form here and well educated. So good question, but I've kind of divulged and from the initial question, but back to sum it up, I would say you become more comfortable the more time you spend out here. Possibly some people become complacent, but it would be an unwise move to not give these animals the full respect that they deserve. So yeah, that is that. So the rain has increased a little bit, sadly. We've decided not to take out the other vehicle in order to ensure that we keep all of our equipment dry and in tip-top working order for this afternoon's drive and future drives for the next few months. And it's also a great time for us to chat to you and really focus on the questions that you may have out on drive. We would certainly not be able to answer all of these questions. So what a great opportunity it is to get to know some of you a bit better and answer your questions. For those of you who don't know yet, to ask questions on Twitter, it's #SafariLive, and on email, it's questions@WildEarthTV. So keep the questions coming through. So yeah, the rain is coming in waves. It's hard to actually say that it's rain. It's more drizzle, but it's quite a thick misty drizzle. I've got one more question coming through. A question from Heather on Twitter regarding spiders and scorpions and whether we get venomous species here and if we see them often. You'll notice I said venomous and not poisonous. It's a small thing, but poison you need to ingest for it to be of a harm to you, whereas venom needs to be injected into your bloodstream. So that's just a small little clarification on the two terms. You can drink snake venom with no ill effects, as long as you don't have a big cut in your mouth. So venomous snakes and scorpions, yes, we do get them out here. In all the time that I've spent here, I've only heard of one guide who has, or anybody actually, whether it's a guide or a guest, who's been negatively influenced or harmed by a scorpion or spider, and it was by a scorpion called a hairy thick-tailed scorpion. It is the most venomous scorpion we get in this area. And just a quick one on the venomosity of scorpions. To distinguish between scorpions' venom between the different species, basically you can deduce a lot from the size of their tail. Now, the bigger their tail and the smaller their pincers, the more dangerous their tail is. And the tail is where the venom comes from. Whereas a scorpion with a relatively thin tail and big pincers, the danger is coming from the front at the pincers, so less venomous. This hairy thick-tailed scorpion's got a very massive tail and almost knife and fork-like pincers. You can hardly even notice that they're pincers. They almost just look like extra legs. And a friend of mine got stung on the foot 3 times, rapid fire, dop, dop, dop. And he said the pain that he felt creeping up his leg was so immense that by the time it got to his groin, he was in tears and biting onto a wooden spoon. He got rushed off to the hospital in Hoedspruit, which is also the closest major town to us here, and he was on morphine. He spent a few days in the hospital, and he was still a bit shaky a week after in terms of his coordination. It's a cocktail of neurotoxic and a small degree of cytotoxic venom, so it affects your nervous system. And he was still a little bit of, he was still off balance or off kilter for 7-8 days after he got stung by that scorpion. But we don't see them very often. They are secretive animals by nature and by their habitat. They're often ambush hunters that waits in either a crevice between rocks or in a little burrow that they dig in the sand, or in little hiding places that they find on bark, on trees. They occupy many different habitats within this ecosystem. Like I say, some are under rocks, some burrow into the ground and make little coin slots vertically into the ground. Others live in the bark and trees. So they are here, but because they ambush predators waiting for their prey to walk past them, they're not often out and about unless they're looking for some mating opportunities. Then you do see them on the move occasionally. And spiders are the same as, typically you get spiders that are in burrows, your baboon spiders and funnel web spiders, so hidden away, or the ones that live in nests or webs rather, are typically in areas that we don't spend too much time. So we don't see them as often as we would like to, because for us seeing any animal is interesting and something to share with you guys, but they don't get seen very often out here. And even though if they do get seen, they're not necessarily going to harm us. An important thing to remember though, when out in the African bush, is your shoes form a very good hiding place. Just like I said, they tend to hide in dark places where they feel safe, both spiders and scorpions. So if you leave your shoes outside at night, make sure to give them a good knock before you slide your foot into it, because I have heard of a few stories of people sliding their foot into a shoe with a little animal waiting for them, which gives them a nasty surprise early in the morning. So Marcus come back, he's warmed up, put a few more layers on, which is good. He's back up at the little house on the prairie, which is what has been named to this structure. Sadly you can't see it, but we'll be sure to show you a different angle when we drive past. This is a structure that Peter coordinated the building of, and we've actually spent a lot of time under it. It's been hugely beneficial to us, so we thank Peter for his skills. He is the kind of guy that you would like to have if you were stuck on a desert island, or a deserted island rather. He's a very kind of hands-on kind of guy that can build whatever you need out of the materials that you often don't have that you require at the time. So good to spend some time here. This is also where we had the fireside chats last Sunday, I believe it was, or was it a Friday? No, it was Friday, I believe. It was Friday or Saturday. And Karula, not Karula, I forget the name of the leopard, I've just gone blank. Was it Kunyuma? It was Kunyuma, I think, that was lying up in this tree just behind us here while HT and Peter were conducting their campfire chats. So there's already some history and stories behind this little tarpaulin that we've strung up, or that Pete strung up for us on quarantine clearings. Okay, Mark, I believe you are back in.
I'm up.
Yeah, back on. Thanks very much, folks. We'll see you later.
See you later, bud.
Cool, Mark.
Thanks. Hi everyone, my name is Mark, in case you haven't seen me before, or in case you don't know. It's so great to be back, but even greater to have some rain, because I've been missing the rain. So I'm trying to just get this thing to work properly. Let's try it the other side. Just a moment, Brian. Oh, that's better. Okay, I'm ready. We've got I say maybe about an hour to go, and hope we're going to fill it. Oh, interesting. Kathy in Indiana. Hi, Kathy. It's a very interesting question because not many people, it doesn't occur to many people that this is a likelihood. And I have to rack my brains. Kathy's asking, it's all very well that we find a lot of animals, snakes and spiders and things out there when we're driving around, but have we ever found anything in the vehicle when we're about to start our drives? And I can't really recall much. I know that I've had a python in my engine. I've had a monitor lizard in my Land Rover when it's been standing. I remember stopping once to watch a python, and I didn't want to get out. I didn't want to disturb it. I was with a friend from Minnesota, and we were watching this python, and it proceeded to come under the vehicle, and trying to get under the vehicle to try and see where it was because I didn't want to drive over it when we left. I noticed it climbing up into the chassis, and there was nothing we could do. It curled itself around, well, between the compartment of the engine compartment and the battery, and short of having to take the battery out and strip the whole vehicle, I couldn't get this thing. The amazing thing is that they find themselves in really inaccessible places, which I suppose par for the course since they don't want to be accessed. And it was actually about 2 days later that I finally managed to get the snake. Funny enough, it had come out of the engine when we stopped. We went to do some horse riding in Hoedspruit. There's a little bush estate, there's a wildlife estate where there's some stables and you can ride horses with giraffes. It's an amazing thing to do, really, is riding horses in the bush. Obviously no predators there, although they have seen leopard. And we were having an introductory discussion or chat with the stable owners about how the ride was going to go, and one of the stable hands came rushing out of the stable where I'd parked the Land Rover and screaming snake, snake, and this python had found itself in the stable. Of course the horses were nonplussed, they didn't really mind, but I took the snake out and took it for a drive down to the river and let it go down at the Blider River. So it was a 2-day affair that, and everywhere I went I'd stop and open up the engine, make sure it wasn't getting injured, it wasn't near any moving parts, but it seemed to have curled itself around an area between the battery and the engine compartment. It wasn't moving until that one time. Maybe it got too hot and decided to come out. There have been stories of tourists, people that have come to Kruger National Park to visit and have driven away with all sorts of wildlife in their car, of course unexpectedly. In fact, there was a story once. Now, I think Scott was talking about venomous snakes earlier, perhaps, and one thing that we don't have here, which is one of the most venomous snakes, is the green mamba. We certainly get the black mamba. But there was one reported case, and it was, I believe it was seen a number of times in Skukuza. Now, Skukuza is almost like a town. Skukuza is the main camp of the Kruger National Park, and it's almost like a town. It has its own post office, bank, supermarkets. It has its own. There's a school for the kids. There's a golf course where just recently someone was eaten by a crocodile. But get back to that one later. But this whole little village, there was a green mamba that was seen in this camp, this Skukuza camp, and they believe that it must have come in perhaps from the coast where they live, with people from the coast, maybe in a trailer or a caravan or somewhere curled up in the car. I can just imagine those people, if whoever it was, lucky that the snake didn't come out on their drive. Well, down here, it's a pretty long distance, about 900 kilometers, 800-900 kilometers from Durban, and a drive like that for a snake to come all the way up from Natal is a pretty long drive. But I'd have to confer with people like Peter and Scott and others and see if they've ever started up a vehicle in the morning or in late afternoon and found something there. I've found my own things in my car. I've had bats that are roosting under the canvas canopy of my Land Rover. Spiders, naturally, sometimes from spiders that either find their way there or fall out of trees. But I can't think of anything really that serious that I can mention. It doesn't really happen that often. You know, I have to remember that the only way something's going to get into a vehicle is possibly falling down on top of it rather than climbing up, especially into the cab. And the way animals will get into a car is sort of up through the chassis into the engine compartment and staying in the chassis rather than in the actual car. Of course, we've got the open car, so sometimes parked under trees, things do fall out of trees onto the vehicle. but nothing that exciting, I'm afraid. And, well, I guess it's going to rain again. Yes, go ahead. Question and answer session. Clancy, hi Clancy, how are you doing? And just by the way, Clancy, thanks, managed to get that thing you sent. How's my Land Rover these days? My Land Rover's pretty sick. It got me here, and yesterday I drove from Manyaleti to down here to Djuma with it and back again, even though she got me lost. But it's a bit of a hard ride. It's falling apart. She's old, it's 35 years old, and suspension needs a bit of work. Radiator's leaking. I woke up yesterday morning to find 2 flat tires. I've got a slow leak in both of my back wheels. But it's a Land Rover. Land Rovers, when they get 35 years old, they'll still turn over and they'll still do what they have to do, even though they're a little bit sick. And, well, when this is done, we'll see what I can do to sort it out. But it's the best vehicle I've ever owned, and the only vehicle I will own. It's my Landy. Me and my Landy go together like baobabs and elephants. Peanut butter and jelly. Lawrence and Faye. Now, there's a very interesting question, because the answer to that is yes. Now, Lawrence and Faye are asking, when we're driving around and we just inadvertently drive over dung, do other animals react to the smell and to the presence of that dung on the vehicle? And yes, quite noticeably so. In fact, perhaps one of the harshest is lion dung. A lot of the herbivores, the dung doesn't have that much of a smell other than the fermenting and that horse manure type smell. Elephant dung, of course, got its own unique smell. Elephant dung doesn't really stick to tires. Buffalo dung, I'm sure we've got a lot of buffalo dung on all of these tires. There must have been a good few buffalo here on the clearing last night, because there's a lot of buffalo dung between here and FC. I actually had to do buffalo dung slalom just walking back to FC, and luckily didn't step in it, because it's not going to dry very quickly now. Another thing about buffalo dung at this time of the year, because the grasses are very, very green, the dung is very, very wet, and it's almost like they've all got these permanent runny tummies. So that does stick to the tires, but nothing really reacts to things to buffalo dung. If anything, perhaps the herbivore dung that we get on the tires manages to mask a little bit of the scent of the vehicle, the rubber, diesel, petrol, oil, that vehicle smell tends to maybe mask it, the same way as maybe a dog will roll in dung before it goes hunting. But what does happen is when we're sitting with lion, and that we've had lion on a kill for some time, and what happens is when they're on a fairly large carcass, they'll move away from the carcass and they'll defecate somewhere and then come back and feed or lie in the shade. And so that sometimes, if it's a buffalo and a small number of buffalo or giraffe, only a small group of lion, you can find an area almost saturated with dung, because the process of eating meat, digesting and getting rid of stomach contents is an ongoing thing. And sometimes it's unavoidable when leaving a sighting or coming into a site, unavoidable to go over lion dung. It's one of the smelliest that you can ever imagine. Take doggy do and multiply it by, well, exponentially. And I've noticed elephant making, or rather reacting quite harshly to the smell of lion dung. All the herbivores, when there's lion dung on the tires, all the herbivores react quite harshly, because they pick up that scent of lion and they obviously react to it. Leopard and hyena to some extent as well, but it's not as prevalent. It's the lion, because they are so big and because they live in prides and because you'll find numbers of them, sometimes it just happens that one does. And I promise you don't want to be sitting at a carcass watching lion feed and be downwind from either the rotting carcass or the smell of their dung. Baboon dung's another one, but nothing really reacts to baboon dung. Baboon, being omnivorous, they'll feed on so many different things, whether it's arthropods, insects and things, or small mammals, or the berries and fruits and leaves, even grass that they eat. That mixture, very much like us humans, and unfortunately for most omnivores, it's also rather a smelly dung. But because they're not really that much of a predator, nothing really reacts to it. It's a very amazing thing, in fact, in that I've seen baboon killing and eating baby impala, and if any of you saw that wild dog footage the other day, it's a harsh thing. It's the reality of what really happens in nature is something that one has to learn to live with. When you're a naturalist, when you're studying this kind of thing, when this becomes part of your life, you can't turn away from something like that. It becomes almost compelling to be able to see how nature does things, how nature's been doing things. And the very fact that everything has its niche in the world today is because this is how nature works. So it's quite a violent thing to watch them kill wild dog, baboon. I've seen lion as well, also not making a very neat job of it. But what I don't understand, and something that I'm still trying to come to terms with, is baboon will take baby impala, yet most of the time, most of the year, in fact, when they're not lambing, baboon and impala will share the same space. You will find, well, not only impala, but baboon and bushbuck, baboon and nyala. I've even seen the likes of vervet monkeys, and I know I'm going off the subject a little bit, but I've seen vervet monkeys picking ticks off of bushbuck, and the bushbuck allowing them to do so because they live in such close harmony. But for baboons to live with impala and the impala not to react as though they were predators, the way impala do react to predators, it's something that I still can't quite explain. And that a big male baboon just out of the blue, while he's sitting amongst the impala that don't see him as a predator, how he can grab a baby impala by the leg and rip it limb from limb and eat the spoils. So I haven't really noticed impala reacting to baboon dung, especially when it is inadvertently squished by tires. But it's something, something that actually we should look at when we are driving around, and if we do have that circumstance arise, then we'll point it out to you. And animal behavior is an incredible thing. Animal behavior is not something that can be written about in books. You can write general stuff. There's the Safari Companion, there's Peter Apps's, what's it called, I forget. There are a couple of books on basic animal behavior, but animal behavior, very much like ours, is random. It's each individual is a different creature, each individual animal. And I'm talking even two praying mantises of the same species have different behavior patterns because they react to their environment, they react to stimuli, they react to everything in their environment differently. And yes, there is instinct, and yes, the scale of how much instinct a creature has is comparable to its size, and the amount of ability to learn varies according to size. But ultimately, you can write basics about animal behavior, but nothing that you write in the book is something that will be that consistent in the field. So it's a very interesting thing to watch, because there's always going to be an animal doing something you've never seen it do before, or something unusual. And I think those are the things that we try and look for out here. We might be seeing impala every day, but it's seeing impala doing something that is unusual, or seeing impala maybe doing something that you didn't really see or you've never really noticed before. And that is one thing that is obviously a key factor, is that this is an unknown object, not an unknown object. It's a foreign object, driving around the bush in a vehicle. Although all of the animals that exist today were born to the presence of vehicles, the fact is that it is this separate entity. And there might be fluids and things that leak from a vehicle that leave the scent of the vehicle behind. There is that element of driving over dung and spreading an animal's scent in ways that it was not meant to. When you think about things like rhino and hippo and certain animals that use their dung as scent marking measures to be able to demarcate their territory, and the messages that come through just with those little bits of scent by perhaps scraping their feet in their dung and walking their dung on their pathways to demarcate those pathways as theirs. Here we come along with a vehicle, we drive over the dung, and we are spreading that animal's scent into areas that are not its own territory. We can actually be inadvertently affecting the way animals interact with each other by putting their scent in places where they would never put it themselves. Always things to consider, but always things to think, perhaps to look out for, if you get to know things on a much longer term basis. When you tend to live with things for a long time, you get to understand their territories, then perhaps you can notice any anomalies in their behavior. based on the presence of the vehicle or the fact that there's dung on the tires. Problem is, 2 months that we're here, the 2 months that we have left, perhaps not really that much time to be able to get to understand things as in-depth as we would like. It's something that you would need to do over a much longer period of time. Just looking at the sky down in the south. It's getting very, very light, which means it's going to be lifting, which is a good thing, because maybe by the time lunchtime rolls around it might burn off. Linda in Ohio. Hi Linda, welcome to our drive this morning, or our standing still under a tarpaulin this morning. Touchy subject, but something I can just maybe just mention. Linda wants to know about the rhino in the Sabi Sand. Well, the rhino in the Sabi Sand, pretty much you can extend to the rhino in Kruger. Now, you all know that we have an exceptionally difficult problem or situation with rhino at the moment. We're currently sitting on over 1,000 rhino that have been poached in this country this year, with the greatest number being poached in Kruger. In fact, the poaching in Kruger, it has become so bad that they've had to stop now, and I'll tell you why shortly. But they've started relocating rhino either to safer areas outside the park or to safer areas within the park that have better patrolling areas. And so far the rhino that they have managed to move have been able to slot in with the local populations fairly well. Because you've got to remember, you're taking something out of its own territory and you're inserting it into territories that are already existing. And so there are going to be conflicts. But if it means saving a species, it's a vital option to maybe look at. I can't tell you numbers, I can't tell you where, I can't tell you much about the fact that there are rhino in Kruger, and ergo there are rhino here in the Sabi Sand. We don't show them on camera, we try not to talk about them too much. It is a very, very sensitive issue, especially this time of the month. We've got a full moon, perhaps that's the very reason why we have this weather. I call it the full moon weather. And the full moon is sort of the ideal time for poachers to come in at night. They come in on foot, and sadly they hardly ever get taken out by elephant and lion. And unfortunately, it would be nice if that were the case. But then we wouldn't be able to do what we're doing. You either have animals that are so opposed to humans that they become aggressive, or you have them that animals like we have them here. They're so accustomed to vehicles that they have instilled a little bit of trust in us humans and that's where the mistakes happen. I don't know answers to the rhino issue. What I do know is that one of the greatest pioneers of rhino conservation passed away just this last week, Ian Player, who was probably credited as the most instrumental person in saving the white rhino from extinction back in the 50s in Shlishlui Umfolozi Game Reserve down in KwaZulu-Natal. An exceptional man. I was asked recently to compose a list of people I'd like to have on Fireside Chat, and I think, well not I think, but Ian Player was one of them, especially because we have this serious rhino problem, or poaching problem at the moment. And I thought if there was ever somebody to talk to who experienced the decline of rhino 50 years ago, 60 years ago, and how he managed to, not single-handedly obviously, but it was through his efforts and it was through his expertise and guidance that the white rhino was brought back from extinction. In fact, it was in 1963, I think it was, the first white rhino were put back in the Sabi Sand. And from then to 1987, when we translocated the first white rhino out of the Sabi Sand. We had so many in the Sabi Sand in the 80s. I was on the first white rhino darting project when the Sabi Sand was still self-enclosed, and the Sabi Sand made a deal with another reserve to swap the white rhino for some other animals. They brought in hartebeest, and sadly these animals came in from a predator-free area, so despite being one of the fastest antelope that you can get in this part of the world, lion had a field day. They certainly did. But I don't know, somewhere along the line the world and politicians have got to come to there's got to be some sort of mandate that lay off. You can arrest poachers daily, and there'll just be new people to take their place. You can break these rhino syndicates and there'll best be a new one to take its place. There is unfortunately so much money involved in such a sad affair, and unfortunately there are some elements of our human population, or there's some people in our that see greed over everything else, and so we try not to show rhino. We try not to talk about them too much. We don't want to be an instrument in the loss of any rhino here on the Sabi Sand, and it's very, very awkward because we have a live camera, so we're very careful about how we deal with that situation. I hope that answers the question. A bit of light coming through now. I like it. I like to see a little bit of light. Sandy in Indiana. Status of the white lion in the Timbavati. There's a pride known as the giraffe pride. Now I've seen the white ones there. I believe there are more white lions. There's some cubs that have been born up in Kruger somewhere, and then there's the pride called the jacaranda pride that live around my part of the world. Giving you a status, I'm not really sure. I haven't seen any of the lion for a while. I've got a coalition of 4 males that I see from time to time. They come past my house, and a couple of females. But I haven't seen the pride as a whole for some time now. And I'm not in touch with any of the guides from that area, so I don't really know what they see. And once again, I'm not on social media that much, so I don't know what gets posted. But there were the 2 from the giraffe pride, which is down sort of near the entrance to the Timbavati, and then there's another pride up where I am in the northern Timbavati, Umbabat, called the jacaranda pride that carry the gene. But other than that, of course, just outside the Timbavati is the Global White Lion Project, or the Global White Lion Trust, operated solely on a basis of trying to preserve the gene pool of white lion. But unfortunately, because we understand genetics the way that we do, white lion can virtually be made by any zoo or any collector. So you have white lion all over the world. Unfortunately, in this country, there are farms that farm lion for nefarious purposes, and white lion are sought after for that. So white lion aren't really as special as they used to be, because we're able to do a genetic profile of an individual, and when you match male and female genetic profiles, you can be almost assured that you're going to get white lion cubs. So they're fairly easy to breed nowadays, and the gene pool has spread so widely that they're too many. Humans have made too many of them. It would be nice if nature was left to its own devices, and it retained its status as a recessive gene within the population, the white gene, the gene for the leucism within the species. Sometimes I've got to keep quiet. Lynn. Sorry, you see, every now and then you've got to stop talking and actually listen, because it tells you things, what the birds are doing or what they're not doing. Lynn wants to know if I've ever seen any black leopards. No, never. Never, ever. I mean, some have been recorded, and the opposite of the white lion, or rather the opposite of the recessive gene that causes or creates the white lion, is melanism, which is what a black leopard is. It's just an ordinary, like a black panther is just an ordinary jaguar with the gene for melanism. And, well, black leopards, they do exist. I've seen a photograph of a black leopard female with a normal coloured cub, but I haven't seen, not here in the Sabi Sand. I remember about 30 years ago, when I first started in the Sabi Sand, there was reports of a black leopard up towards the northwestern corner. In fact, the person I was working with at the time at the lodge said she saw it one night on her way back in from the city, but I've never seen one personally. They're not very elusive, and of course it's once again a recessive gene. There's some creatures, there's some animals that have a higher tendency towards melanism, and there's one of the goshawks, for example. Perhaps I've seen more melanism in goshawks than I have in mammals. And of course there's the other aspect that I was mentioning earlier about breeding, and nowadays breeding black individuals like black impala, for example, melanistic impala, melanistic springbok, has become big business, and they fetch very, very high prices on game auctions because they become collectors' things. But it goes beyond that, and then sometimes you've got breeders that are starting to find the ways to manipulate the genes, that an impala will have a white saddle on its back, or white patches and black patches, and I think sometimes we just fool around with genes a little bit too much because we put a value on something, and so we think it's right. And if something like that were to escape into the wild and introduce that manipulated gene into the wild, it would probably be bred out eventually, because if anything, perhaps it would become a feature that isn't very advantageous to the individual, but the opposite can also happen. The very thing that drives the genetic diversity that we have is whether something has a mutation of a gene, and that mutation just happens to be advantageous to that particular animal at that particular time in the world's history. The climate is right, the plants are right, everything just happens to be right for that moment in time that drives that one recessive gene to become a dominant gene. And that's what could happen if we fool around a little bit too much with genetics and these animals get reintroduced into the wild. We never know what can happen. But over a much longer lifetime, Lynn wants to know if I've seen Tara recently, because she's working with black leopard. I must talk to Will actually, and Tara. I haven't seen Tara for a while. And then when I'm trying to think, the last time I was down at the leopard project, Ingwe Leopard Project, was 2 years ago, perhaps. I think. Well, I can't even remember. I'm trying to get things straight in my head. We were at Thornybush last year. Oh, it was a year ago. That's right. We were doing a bit of filming. That's right, with Tara. So I haven't spoken to Tara in a while, but I must find out from Will. In fact, maybe I can get a message in my ear if they have managed to get any black leopard on camera down there. It is an area where black leopard have been seen frequently, and of course the Leopard Project has a number of cameras out, and it's very interesting how they follow all the leopards, especially what Tara is doing. I believe she's doing a thesis on that. And sadly I just don't get a chance to chat to them that much, mostly because of where I live, more than anything else. I have a very weak cell signal at best, and as in mostly no electricity, no internet, so it's difficult to keep in touch with the rest of the world. I'm 40 kilometers into the reserve. It's 60 kilometers for me to get to the nearest town. Sometimes can take me 5 hours if there's lion or elephant on the road. I often get home and all my groceries have defrosted because I've spent so much time on the road with elephants. I can't leave them alone. So when I'm either driving into town or back home after town, and I find stuff on the road, I tend to stay with it until they either move off or it becomes really too late. And then sometimes when town is such a long way away from me, it might not be long in distance, it's just long in time to get there, because driving through the reserve is slow. I don't really have time much in town. I have a very short window to do what I need to do. And a long time ago you could do a day's shopping and get a lot accomplished. Nowadays, for some unknown reason, an entire day is not long enough anymore. But I'm hoping to catch up. I'm here for 2 months. I'm hoping to catch up on a lot of things. I'm going to chat to Will quite a lot, I hope, and learn a lot more about what's been going on at Kabatolo, at the Leopard Project. And I hope to learn a little bit more about what Tara is up to. And I'm wondering, that's it for the rain. And sorry, Brian, who was that? Asking about the popcorn smell. Jody, New Mexico. Jody, not Odie. Odie's a dog. Jody, New Mexico. Hi, Jody. Nice to have you with us again. Jody's also an old viewer. Well, a viewer from...
Okay, well, welcome back. Sorry. But the good news is we are no longer stuck under the little house on the prairie, and we are out and about. So as you can see, there's quite a lot of light coming through the clouds. The tent seems to have lifted, and now we have the beauty of half an hour to explore, 20-25 minutes. So I got an update from the guides earlier. Quite a lot of the guests decided to stay dry this morning and not head out, so there haven't been many people exploring this morning, which is good in one way, that we don't know what to expect. So we don't know what's out there, which for me is really exciting. So let's see what happens. I am hoping to find something interesting for you guys, obviously, but like I say, we've got no updates from the other guides, which means anything could happen around the next corner. I really didn't think we'd get to get out this morning, so I'm really happy that we are out. Still a few clouds looming, so we'll see how long the sun stays out for. Quite a lot of tracks going down this road. A combination of hippo, probably the Taylor Dam, heading to some zebra and impala. So I will be scanning the roads. Oh, this is an animal we don't see. Oh, this is an animal we don't see very often. So, if you just zoom straight down. Awesome. That, folks, was brief, but it's the first warthog that I've managed to show you guys since I've been working here. You notice their little tails straight up, a very stereotypical characteristic of the warthog that can be associated with them, and it's a very important adaptation that they've made to run with their tail in the air. Because they are so short, running through long grass and vegetation, members of a sounder, or a little, it's a sounder of warthogs, can follow one another by their little tail tufts sticking out above the grass. So it's a follow me signal that the warthogs use when running away. And the reason why the warthog are nervous in this area is because it's not the ideal habitat for them. They can survive here, but due to the fact that they are so short and the vegetation in this area is quite thick, they are preyed on quite heavily, and it is easier for predators to catch them. In areas with a lot more open grasslands, you tend to find warthog in higher numbers. here they have got the odds stacked against them because of the nature of the vegetation. It's important to slow down at road junctions to check for any tracks of potentially animals leaving a road that you may have been driving on, or joining a road that you haven't driven on. So I will often slow down at a road junction to check for tracks. Thankfully for us, the animals do like using the roads. It's easier for them to travel down. It's silent. Very similar to us using highways or freeways to get from A to B. Animals use the roads, so if we're lucky we bump into them whilst they're on the road, but if not, we can still be aided by following their tracks, and it gives us an idea as to where they could be. Following tracks off the roads is very difficult, especially at this time of the year when the ground isn't as dry and dusty as it is in winter, and there's a lot more foliage, some buffalo dung in the road, and obviously there are tracks to go with it. Not uncommon to find lion tracks following buffalo, and that is what I have come to investigate here. I thought I may have seen a lion track. But for those of you who have been watching some of my drives, I tend to get a bit carried away and my mind plays tricks on me. Wishful thinking. Wouldn't it be nice to find some fresh lion tracks following a herd of buffalo now? So my goal is in the next 15 minutes to get to Treehouse Dam. It's not too far away, anything's possible between here and there, but I would like to monitor a certain weaver bird, village weaver, who I saw starting to build its nest 2 mornings ago, and then Hayden actually viewed that same weaver, it was in his shot unknowingly, yesterday morning. So I noticed that the weaver just about completed its nest, basically in what would have been a 24-hour process. So let's see now if 48 hours later it has completed its nest. And then just interesting to know that it would take on average 2 days to start a nest and finish it. It is something that really interests me, the fact that they can create such an intricate design with no hands and just a beak, weaving those little blades of grass into one another. It really is a commendable feat that they pull off. And they're under big pressure to do it properly. If the ladies don't like their job, they don't move off to find another male. They unceremoniously tear down the nest and get the male to start again from scratch. So they maintain a very high standard of accommodation, rightfully so. You don't want to be raising your kids in a substandard abode. So I did take a photo of that nest being built within its first few hours 2 days ago, in order to be able to go back and monitor and show you guys. So I have uploaded the picture onto my computer, and I think it's Chris Road Cropper, a viewer who really is very active, and we appreciate all your activity on Twitter and the way you follow us so closely, Chris. She managed to do a screenshot yesterday while Hayden... Oh! Now, would you believe it? A roadblock. So you may be wondering what happened. The tree didn't fall over by chance. It would have been pushed over by an elephant, and even though they only feed on a small amount of the tree, let me actually creep forward a little bit more to show you where he has fed. So you can see VM, who's on camera with me now this morning. We'll zoom and you can see he's fed on a few of those branches, which he never would have been able to gain access to if that tree was still standing upright. And you may ask yourself why they don't feed on more of the tree. This is an acacia tree, a knobthorn specifically, and acacias and most other trees actually are able to push out acidic tannins or bitter tannins through to the leaves, therefore deterring the attacker from doing any more damage. This tree will continue to grow. It's got an adventitious root system that's very deep, so there are some roots connected into the earth, the life-giving soil that they require. And not only will it continue to survive horizontally, but it will create a microhabitat for smaller animals to hide in and start their homes. So it may seem like destruction, but it does create homes for smaller animals, and a very important part of maintaining a balance between wooded areas and grassland. There's some hyena tracks there. I'm so happy we got out, folks. As much as I really enjoyed answering those questions and being able to really spend some time with you on a more one-to-one basis without any animals distracting us, it is good to get out and show you guys a little bit of the property this morning. A small dip, so we may have a bit of a crackly signal for a moment, just to warn you. Let's just to the radio there for a second. There was a guy doing some update. No major changes. Some had heard a leopard vocalizing not close to us, but just thought I'd let you know. And despite that leopard calling and thinking he had a good idea of where it was, he couldn't find the leopard or even a single track. So bulls are talking doesn't necessarily mean we're going to find. Now, in all excitement of coming out this spring, I have come to Twin Dams instead of Treehouse Dam. So I'm not sure if we're going to make it to the Weaver Nest this morning. Sadly, I was really excited to do that. But let's see what Twin Dams has to offer us. There seems to be nobody home, so I'm just going to continue, folks. and I'm sure we will find something else of interest shortly. There was a bird calling that you would have heard. It's an orange-breasted bushshrike. That's a slight variation of its regular call that I heard when I was at Buffelshoek Dam the other day. A lot of bird calls do vary slightly, depending on the individual bird, depending on the area. So something to bear in mind when listening to bird calls. Just like we have different tones in our voice or different ways of expressing things, so do the birds. Now this is a beautiful animal that there was almost one less of yesterday. These were the animals that HT managed to see getting stalked by the two lionesses yesterday morning. We're not far from where HT was, so it could have been these same individuals actually. 4 male Inyala. Now what we can see, the one in the background is doing a dominance display, and it really is something unique. One another in the slow motion routine. Obviously he put on such a good show that the other ones didn't even attempt to compete with his beauty, and he does look like the biggest male in this bachelor herd of Inyala. So when he saw the other youngster running through into frame, he obviously thought, is this guy running in to assert his dominance, or he's coming in a bit too quickly? So let me just remind him of his place within the herd. A lot of animals do have these displays that they will try their best to perform or outperform competition. If competition feels like they really do have a shot and it's an equal battle, then it may come to blows, and the horns will be used, and the slow motion routine will turn into a lot more of a high intensity, more dangerous affair. But at least this is a way to weed out any unnecessary damage or harm to one another. So I'm guessing that those are the same 4 Inyala that narrowly escaped a lion attack yesterday morning with HT. We're not far from that area, and the numbers add up. It was also 4 individuals yesterday that were seen. Wouldn't it be interesting if now we had have seen a leopard stalking them? Imagine 2 mornings in a row being stalked by a lion and the next morning by a leopard. What's important to know, and I'd like to emphasize, is that predators try their best, and obviously they do succeed in hunting, but they are not nearly as successful as you'd imagine them to be. Maybe 10%, 20% of their hunts actually provide a kill. So you'll find a lot of these animals, like the Inyala, buffalo, you name it, have had near misses and close encounters with predators. One animal that I really like to see and understand their conflict with predators is the zebra, because zebra have got very big hind quarters and they can deliver a mighty kick. So you can imagine a lion jumping on the back of a zebra. The zebra just unleashes both back legs and the lion often goes flying off in the opposite direction. However, the lion often really sunk its claws into the zebra's rump, and when it gets kicked off, it slices the rump of the zebra. Just a flesh wound, really. But what happens is the stripes grow back in a abnormal way that they don't meet up. So I'll do my best to show you guys not only to see where zebra have been attacked, their skin has been ripped by the lion, and their stripes grow back. I'm trying to use the correct word, but not aligned, unaligned stripes. So it's a good indicator for us to see which zebra have had close calls. And whoa, I think we have encountered some millipedes which are making love. So even though that may look like one millipede, I can assure you that it is two, and they've got an audience of ants, and they've chosen an interesting place to do their business. I guess for them, they don't know that they're in the middle of a road, but they are mating. I'm not sure how long they mate for. I haven't actually seen millipedes mating very often. But that is what we have here. So a little bit of procreation going on this morning. The millipedes can afford to be out in the open like this because they've got a chemical in their bodies very similar to cyanide. So most animals cannot eat or digest them without getting sick. There are a handful that can eat them. The civet is one of them. Scorpions also feed heavily on millipedes. But that could answer my question as to why they're out in the open. They're obviously very slow moving animals. Their exoskeleton isn't very hard, so they rely on this harmful toxic cyanide-like substance within their bodies to deter predators from eating them, and that's obviously why they feel that making love in the middle of the road is acceptable or safe. Cool. Are you talking? Okay, copy. Okay, we've only got a couple more minutes, folks. For choice in terms of drinking, but it is worth checking all these little muddy pools for tracks of animals coming down to drink. I've once seen a python in one of these little mud wallows, so now every time I drive past one, I'm hoping to see a python's nose and eyes sticking out. If there's one snake that I'd like you all to see, it would be a python, and this is the time of year to see snakes. We do get pythons in this area, but have yet to see one. They can be youngsters, which are, I think they're born at around 40 centimeters in length, so born quite big, but they can turn into giants, 6-meter giants, that can feed on a fully grown impala. Hard to believe that a snake could eat an impala. Well, folks, thanks again for all the questions, and goodbye. We'll see you next time.